Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This is the one-child policy debate. So the motion is this House would introduce a voluntary one-child policy. Right, and proposition. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, we must introduce a one-child policy, voluntary one, for the following reasons. Because we need to tackle poverty. Because overpopulation is wrecking the planet, because the more people we have, the more pollution we're pumping out, because the global warming is aggravated by population growth, and because we want every child to be a child who is loved and who is amply provided for, not just to have the bare minimum, but to live in reasonable comfort. And because of rising life expectancy, add that to high fertility, and it's a recipe for disaster. We are not miser-generative. We want people to have children, but we suggest that there should be only one child per woman. And we do calculate this per woman because sometimes there's no father's name on the birth certificate. Sometimes paternity is uncertain, and a man can't be sure that he sired a certain child unless he insists on a DNA test. We could look at the lists of countries ranked by the Human Development Index. At the very top, you'd have places like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland. At the very bottom, you'd have places like Burkina Faso, Niger, and so on. Then we could look at countries by fertility. And you would see at the very bottom would be mostly Denmark, Sweden, but countries like Moldova, Russia, Romania. And other way around, the countries with the highest fertility would mostly be Niger, Burkina Faso, and other equatorial African countries. So why is it these are completely inverted like that? Clearly, there's a link. So the more children you have, the less money you're going to have for each of them. It stands to reason. It's a no-brainer, that one. The other thing is, the more affluent countries, these people choose to have fewer children. They tend to stay in education longer. Now, in some of the less economic developed countries, people have to leave school in their teens. Some of them don't get to go to school at all. In Burkina Faso, there's only 22% literacy, and girls are even less likely to be able to read than boys because they never get the chance to go to school. Then we get children having children who are married off as soon as they reach puberty, and that's wrong. So we want every child to have a decent education and to have a genuine childhood. People shouldn't start having children until they are in their 20s. It's no mystery that a one-child policy would abolish poverty in a generation. Contrast India and China. China introduced the one-child policy in 1980. I agree with the goal, but not with the method, which was brutal. So within 30 years, they'd become the second largest economy in the world. And they'd been barely in the middle league of world economies, and now they're close to the top. India in that time, the economy has grown, but nothing like as fast. Their population has raced ahead. They're about to overtake China, and there's really no end in sight. And India is like trying to run up an escalator. They have to go very fast just to stand still. There are so many problems which are aggravated because there's so many people. It's very hard to provide sufficient number of jobs for these people. Look at the Arab Spring. Those revolutions were often caused by a bulge in population. Population explosion, massive youth unemployment leads to huge upheaval and social discontent. So how do we propose to implement our very necessary policy? By a public information campaign, by education, to encourage people to have just one child, whether a girl or a boy, they're just as good, and you give that child a wonderful life. So how this will work is this way. We'll provide child benefit for the first child, but for the second and subsequent child, there'll be no child benefit paid. The additional children, they will still get free schooling and free healthcare, but that's it. As for education, university education, that'll be free of charge for the first child only. Second and subsequent children will have to pay fees. Sometimes we have to show a bit of tough love. We're being cruel to be kind. If we don't do this, what happens? There will be a scrap for the world's resources. These are scarce. Even land is finite. Hydrocarbons are running out of. Even metals. There's a limited amount of metal in the world. I know we can melt down metals and reconfigure them, but we will have run out of metals with which to do that even. So we don't have enough fresh water, everything like that. So if we fail to implement this policy, we are facing calamity. This is a policy that we cannot afford not to implement. So there'll be no forced sterilisation. We'd offer those free of charge, though. And there'll be no forced abortion, of course. If people want to have many children, they will have the right to do so. However, they have to bear the consequences, and they have to bear most of the cost of doing so. because we are humane, this is the truly humane path. We could massively reduce human suffering and enormously increase human happiness by implementing this very essential policy. And that's why I plead with the House to vote for this most exigent policy. So now I shall be the opposition. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the member opposite for his highly eloquent speech with its many huge gaps in the logic. You could drive a truck through those, or perhaps a school bus. His policy and this motion must be rejected because it's unworkable, unwanted, unwarrantable, cruel, and will not work. It is a gross infringement of human rights to propose this policy. It's chilling the way he is so heartless towards second and subsequent children. Was he not a first child? If he wasn't a first child, would he be willing to suffer deprivation because of that? It's utterly unjust. This wouldn't impact on the wealthy who could have several children, but for those who are on the breadline, it would push them into absolute poverty. It's the height of illogic to say we want to reduce poverty, child poverty. We're going to do that by imposing child poverty on the neediest families. It is nauseating. So it is flagrantly discriminatory, certainly against some ethnic minority groups, some religious communities, where being phylogenitive is considered an ethical imperative. So we don't propose a natalist policy, but we wouldn't support his policy. All right, public information campaign, we don't disagree with that one, but as for withholding child benefit in particular, no, that's absolutely wrong. So he wants to create poverty for children. His goals cannot be achieved, and whatever he says, these mealy-mouthed words about gentle persuasion, it would necessarily lead to forced sterilization, such as occurred in India in the 70s, or forced abortions, such as occurred in China from the 80s onwards. So it is nauseating, it's utterly inhumane. It leads to the grossest abuses of human rights. This is unnecessary. We have ample resources. The problem is the maldistribution of them. So they need to be apportioned in a fair manner. We have malapportionment at the moment. Human ingenuity always overcomes these problems. I remember way back in the 60s, there was an American academic who said that we were headed for Armageddon, more or less, because of population growth, and it proved to be a Jeremiad. It just didn't come true. So don't think that the speaker opposite is a Cassandra figure. Well, only insofar as we don't believe him. Even to do with scarce land, there's reclamation of land which has occurred in several countries, so we can do that. Eventually we're going to colonize other planets. Renewable energies are coming on stream. We've got tar sands, solar power, wind power, wave power, whatever else, biomass. So energy really is not an issue. It can easily be resolved. We could scale down our lifestyle to conserve the planet's precious resources. His policy is grossly unfair. Would he be willing to have been denied his university education for the sake of such an emetic policy? So it's really not on. And actually, a growing population can be a tremendous boon to populations. We are greying societies, he correctly said. Who's going to care for the elderly? Who's going to pay into the pension schemes? You face population implosion. He mentioned Moldova. Moldova is the poorest country in Europe. Out of all 45, not the European Union, in Europe, it is the very poorest. So surely having a low fertility rate is catastrophic. It's not something to be desired. So yes, some people want to have few children or none. There could be good reasons for this. It could be just selfishness. Or some people have medical reasons why they can't have children. So his policy makes no sense. It's irrational and is undesirable. And that is why I plead with the House to vote against this detestable motion.